The Galactic sovereignty verification system had never returned an error in 400 years. Not once. It had processed the bloodlines of 11,000 ruling dynasties across 600 inhabited worlds. It had authenticated emperors and confirmed heirs. It had flagged pretenders and dissolved false claims before wars could begin. The GSVS was not merely a machine. It was considered, by the collective consensus of the Galactic Council, the single most trusted instrument in the known universe. Which was exactly why nobody was prepared for the day it simply stopped. Delegate Magistra Voronkai of the Thurvian Conclave arrived at Verification Hall 9 with the calm authority of a woman who had spent 60 years navigating interstellar politics. She carried herself like carved stone, immovable, unreadable, certain. Beside her walked Prince Sereth Vel Duranu, heir to the Duranu sovereignty, a young man whose genetic ancestry stretched back through 17 unbroken royal generations. The scan was meant to be a formality. They always were, at this level. Human liaison, Voronkai said without looking at the small desk near the chamber entrance. You may begin the pre-verification log. The human liaison, a junior council attaché named Marcus Webb, looked up from his console. He had been with the Galactic Council for 3 years, assigned to Verification Hall 9 specifically because it handled the highest-ranking cases. He was considered reliable, thorough, and by most alien colleagues, quietly unremarkable. He had a habit of reading everything twice. Of course, Magistra, Marcus said. He pulled up the prince's file on his secondary screen and began the standard pre-scan cross-reference, a procedural step almost everyone in his position skipped because the GSVS didn't need pre-verification. It was the GSVS. It didn't make mistakes. Marcus did it anyway. Old habit. His first supervisor at the hall, a retired Ketheri archivist, had told him, *, the machine checks bloodlines. You check everything else, *. He started reading. The scan chamber hummed to life. Prince Sereth stepped onto the verification platform with practiced ease, arms loose at his sides, chin level. The golden rings of the GSVS orbital array descended around him in concentric circles, each one inscribed with the authentication glyphs of the original founding pact. Voronkai folded her hands and waited. The rings turned, and then they stopped. Not the graceful deceleration of a completed scan. A hard stop. A wrong stop. The kind of stop that made the chamber go utterly, impossibly silent. The display panel above the platform read 3 words in flat amber. Claim incomplete. Review. Voronkai's composure cracked for the first time in Marcus's memory. Her head turned toward the panel, so quickly he heard the fabric of her collar shift. That is not possible, she said. Senior Technician Derivas hurried across the chamber floor, her four-fingered hands moving across the diagnostic panel. The bloodline authentication is valid, she reported, voice tight. 17 generations confirmed. Genetic sovereign markers present and active. But the system it's flagging a secondary requirement. What secondary requirement? I'm attempting to determine that. Marcus had not looked up from his console. He had found something in the pre-scan file. A clause. One sentence, nested inside the original Duranu Sovereignty Charter, filed 312 years ago during the Conclave of Settled Borders. He had almost passed it entirely. It was written in early Thurvian, a dialect so old that most modern translation matrices rendered it as legal boilerplate. He read it a third time to be certain. Then he stood up. Magistra Voronkai, he said carefully, I think I know what the system found. She turned. The look she gave him was the kind a mountain gives a passing bird, not hostile, simply vast and uninterested. You are a pre-log attaché. Yes, ma'am. And I found something in the foundational charter that the GSVS is likely cross-referencing. A beat of silence. Voronkai looked at Derivas, who had no answer. She looked at the amber panel, which had not changed. Then she looked back at Marcus. Speak. He turned his console screen toward her. Article 9, Clause 4 of the original Duranu Sovereignty Charter. It's in early Thurvian. The translation matrices flag it as ceremonial language, so it gets compressed in modern filings. But the GSVS runs against original text, not compressed summaries. Voronkai moved closer, reading. The color shifted in her face. Not a human flush, but the subtle darkening around her orbital ridges that, Marcus had learned, meant something had genuinely surprised her. The sovereignty of Duranu, she read slowly, translating aloud, shall pass to no heir who does not hold the seat of founding. The bloodline alone does not crown. The throne confirms the blood. The chamber was silent. Prince Sereth had stepped off the verification platform without anyone noticing. He stood very still. The seat of founding, he said, and his voice carried something thin in it, something young and suddenly uncertain. That is the throne of Velkareth. Yes, Voronkai said, which was destroyed in the shattering of the Third Age. Yes. She paused. Approximately 260 years before you were born. The prince's jaw worked. Then, the charter requires a throne that no longer exists. Correct. Daravos checked her panel. The GSVS is not rejecting the bloodline. It is flagging an incomplete claim. The system cannot verify full sovereignty because the founding condition cannot be fulfilled. So I am not king. You are not verified as king. There is a difference, legally. Is there? The prince's voice was quiet, not angry. Worse than angry, genuinely lost. Marcus had already pulled up 3 more files. Actually, he said, there might be a resolution pathway. Everyone looked at him again. He had learned not to shrink from that. The throne of Velkareth was destroyed, but the charter doesn't specify the original throne. It specifies the seat of founding, defined in Article 2 as any legitimate continuation of the original seat, provided it is constructed from founding materials and recognized by a convened council of sovereignty witnesses. Voronkai moved toward his console in a way that made the room feel smaller. You are reading that from a 300-year-old subclass. Yes, ma'am. Which no one has cited in 300 years. No one needed to, until now. She studied the text. Her expression was unreadable again. The mountain returned. But her orbital ridges had not darkened. That, Marcus had also learned, meant she was thinking rather than dismissing. The founding materials, she said. The throne of Velkareth. Do records exist of its composition? Daravos was already searching. The Hall of Original Instruments holds a partial fragment, recovered from the shattering site, catalogued as a historical artifact. Not as, she paused, not as a founding material. Until now, Marcus said. Voronkai turned fully toward him. You are proposing that we reconstruct a throne from a museum fragment, convene a sovereignty witness council, and use that to satisfy a clause no living jurist has ever invoked. I'm proposing it's possible, Marcus said. Whether it's pursued is not my decision. The prince spoke from where he stood. It is mine. Everyone turned. He looked different than he had when he'd walked in. Still young. Still uncertain in that particular raw way that people look when certainty has been removed from them without warning. But something else was there now. Something that straightened his spine and leveled his eyes. I will not be crowned by a scan that simply didn't flag an obstacle, he said. If my sovereignty has a condition, I want to meet it, not bypass it. He looked at Marcus. Human, what would the process require? Marcus had already made notes. A formal petition to the Hall of Original Instruments for use of the fragment. A minimum of 7 sovereignty witnesses from recognized council member worlds. A ceremonial construction under the supervision of the council archivist. And a second GSVS scan once the seat is established. He paused. Approximately 4 months, if the petition is prioritized. And if it is not. 14. Prince Sereth nodded once. Petition for priority. He looked at Voronkai. Magistra, you have overseen my family's affairs for 30 years. Will you witness? She was quiet for a long moment. Then, I will. The amber panel above the empty platform still read Claim Incomplete. Review. Marcus looked at it for a moment before returning to his console. He flagged the session file, attached his clause citations, and submitted a formal notation. Asterisk preskin cross-reference identified foundational charter condition. GSVS response accurate. Recommend resolution pathway per Article 9, Clause 4, Subprovision, asterisk. 3 days later, his supervisor called him in and asked how he had found it. I read everything twice, Marcus said. His supervisor, a Kethari who had worked verification halls for 40 years, was quiet for a moment. Then she said, the GSVS has processed 11,000 dynasties. No human liaison has ever filed a foundational clause notation. I know. The machine checks bloodlines, she said slowly, as if hearing old words differently. You checked everything else. Marcus shrugged. That's what I was told to do. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she stamped the notation approved and sent it to the Council's permanent record, the first human-sourced legal citation in the 400-year history of the Galactic Sovereignty Verification System. It would not be the last. 4 months later, Prince Sereth Veldarenu stood before a seat built from ancient stone and witnessed by 7 worlds. The GSVS rings descended. They turned without hesitation. They did not stop.